Alan. Oh, thank you. Got it. My vintage remains, can remember a film that had a title something like that, except it wasn't Knockout Sprints, everything you wanted to know about. I guess the reason for this, I was saying to Tash before the rest of you came on, is, I mean, I really do feel that with the introduction of a new format and the introduction of sprint walk, of which we've now got 2 in the next 3 years, it's something where both New Zealand and Australia can really start to make an impact. I mean, we've made an impact already with Tim at WOC and people like Tim and Aston at JWOC as well. And I think we can really build on that. And I won't profess to be an expert on knockout sprints, other than the fact that I've actually set 2 of them now. And it's fascinated me because I think there's a whole bunch of different things that come into dealing with it, which I think it's worth people thinking about. And what I want to talk about is, I've put under 5 headings here. I mean, I'm sure most people are I hope most people are reasonably familiar with the format, in which case I'll go through that reasonably quickly. There are a few interesting things about the ways in which the field can be split in the knockout rounds, which I'd also like to look at, and then basically come down to the practical things. And this is where I guess I'm hoping for sort of feedback and input from other people. I mean, how do we actually train specifically for knockout sprints? And the other one is, I mean, do tactics come into this? Of course, you know, it's going to be the first time we've had an individual race where you're going to be involved in mass starts. And mass start racing introduces the whole range of possibilities of how you might or might not deal with different situations. And with that in mind, I think those last 2 things, tactics and discussion, sort of might merge together, I think. But you know, that's kind of the kind of format that I want to actually look at. So first of all, the overview, and people will be aware, of course, you have Qualification Race, and now this is taken off the IOF website, and it's not necessarily as current, I think, as it could be, because it talks about everything being in one day. And we have had examples in the reasonably recent past where Qualification Race and elimination rounds have actually been on different days. But it talks about Qualification Race in the morning, and that's meant to have a winning time of 8 to 10 minutes. And then your quarterfinals, semi-final and final later in the day. It talks about the quarterfinal round being in the morning and semi-final and final in the afternoon. And they, of course, are meant to have winning times of about 6 to 8 minutes. And it does actually indicate, and we've seen this, we saw this actually in the European Champs earlier this year, that the men and the women may actually have the same course. So what might be 6.5 minutes for the men might, with respect to the women listening, might be 7.5 minutes. But that's the kind of time limit. So the first thing, of course, is different is you've got 4 races in a day. It's interesting. I mean, this is how it's set up, and again, people will be aware of this. So, of course, if you 36 people qualify nominally, in which case you'll have 6 quarterfinals of 6 people, with the top 3 in each qualifying into 3 semi-finals, again of 6 people, with only the top 2 in each semi-final qualifying for the final. And the way it says start interval on there, it's meaning 10-minute gap between each of the different heats. Now, of course, I think probably realistically, we saw this in the one that we ran in April this year after our national champs. If you don't have, the requisite number of people, then obviously locally, and it's probably going to apply in Australia as well, in New Zealand, then your number of quarterfinals will be reduced, either in terms of the number of heats or the number of people in them even, and the same with semi-finals. But the aim, of course, comes down to one final with 6 people in it for the men, and one final with 6 people in it for the women. Now, the qualification race is meant to have 3 different heats. That's something that certainly when we ran Lonely Mountain at the beginning of 2020, we did divide everybody into 3 different heats, but we didn't follow the 3rd line in there, which says that each heat has a different course. Everybody actually ran the same course. So that's actually a little complexity that we haven't got into yet, but it means that on the international level, you'll have 3 people starting at the same time in different heats, which is common in terms of qualification for nowadays the middle distance at WOC, but it used to be true for, but also for sprint at WOC, I guess, as well. As far as possible, the heats shall be equally strong. I'm not sure how they aim to do that. We had a system here where we did it on world rankings, sort of rotated people through the heats as we went down the world ranking list. And as I've said, you're aiming for 36 into the knockout rounds, which means the top 12 in each heat will qualify. And this, I think, is where it gets interesting. There are a few little specifications on that. If 2 people have equal qualification times, presumably at the bottom of that 12, then you sort them on world ranking, or world ranking, world rank total world ranking points. Well, and then you go to the flip of a coin. What's interesting, as I say, is how you work out who goes where. Certainly in terms of the quarterfinals, and I'd forgotten this, that there are actually 2 ways of actually doing this. I know they've both been used. I'm not sure how commonly the second one has been used, but the easiest one to understand is that it's based entirely on where you finish in your qualification heat. So quarterfinal 1 takes the 1st in heat 3, 4th in heat 1, 5th in heat 2, and so on. And that divides basically up so that the heat winners and the heat seconds all end up in different quarterfinals, although they may come back together again later on. And then there's the same kind of thing for deciding where the positions in the quarterfinals go into the semi-finals. So as you can see, it's actually, I find this rather strange myself, but this is the way that it's actually written down, that the top 3 in quarterfinal 1 and the top 3 in quarterfinal 2 all go into the same semi-final. So if you've been with someone, qualified with someone in the same quarterfinal, you stick with them in the semi-final. And certainly where we did this fully at Lonely Mountain in 2020, I think we saw a couple of people who followed themselves right the way through the quarterfinal, semi-final, and final. The other option is that qualified competitors, and I find what's written here a bit ambiguous, are actually allowed to choose which quarterfinal they go into, based, as I understand it, on their world ranking position. And someone, I know Lizzie's been through this, she might be able to sort of correct me on this a little bit better. But now this is a little video on the IRF website.
bitte. Second in, bitte. Next we have Caroline Olsen for Caroline Olsen for Lena Strand, in selection 1, Lena Strand 1. In selection Alice Leek 4, Sophie Bachmann in selection 5, Sophie Bachmann 5, Maya Serna 3, Maya Serna 3.
They read out people's names, and as they read them out, they elect which quarterfinal they actually wish to go into. And I think if you look carefully, you can see Lizzie looking at the back somewhere in there in a New Zealand tracksuit. Right. So I don't know how often this is being used. Can you comment on that, Lizzie, do you think?
To be honest, I don't pay close attention, but I think this was the only time it's being used.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that we got to select in the order that we came in the qualification.
Okay, that's what I thought was a little ambiguous in what was written on the website as to whether it was world ranking or where you finish in the qualification races. So I don't know whether this has been used since, but yeah, when we come to talk about tactics, of course, this is one of the issues you have to deal with. And the people choosing later know where the people who've chosen earlier have elected to go, and it's not necessarily straightforward as to what you should actually do. You never actually see Lizzie make a choice, so I'll stop it there.
I just remember it feels stressful in the moment, but I'm not sure quite how much of an impact it actually had in the long term.
Yeah, that's an interesting little thing that needs to be borne in mind. To say, I was hoping Tim would join us. I don't. Have you joined us, Tim, or not? I'll take the silence as meaning no, because Tim's probably got more experience in this than the rest of us. So I'll move on to forms of splitting, because there's actually, it lists as actually 3, but I've separated out what multiple splits and map and pivot control into 2 separate ones, because they are slightly different and they do have slightly different implications. And of course, there is the option of there being no forking at all, in which case, of course, you are actually in a straight race. Although, as we'll see, in that circumstances, one would hope that the course planner has put in plenty of route choice. So just a few. Here's the quarterfinal of the European Champs from earlier this year, where from the start triangle, it went straight into a very, very small pivot control with 3 loops before the vast bulk of the course being common for everybody. And that little pivot, when you look at it, it's actually very, very simple orienteering when you look at it, that the only real choice in there is probably how you go from number 1 to number 2, if that's the order that you've got it in, which way around that big building you actually go. I don't think, as far as I can tell, there's anything else in there that has actually got any route choice in it at all. Possibly how you go from 5 to 6, but it's essentially a very, very simple split with giving, of course, 6 different options depending upon the order in which you actually you do the 3 loops. And of course, as I say, the important thing here is it comes right at the beginning of the course. When you come out of there, I would imagine it's sufficiently short that everyone can still, you can probably still see the people in front of you. So then it's a matter of staying ahead or catching up. Now compare that to what I gave you in the quarterfinal of Lonely Mountain in 2020. I can't remember whether this was men or women, but the I guess the basic difference is the pivot. From the pivot control, the legs were not quite as obvious. The splits were not quite as obvious in terms of, or not quite as simple in terms of navigation. So the whole course was basically required a lot more navigation than that European Champs one. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, I think is probably debatable in terms of how common that actually is. But it's also got the fact that you've got 3 controls, 4 controls, 5 controls to get through before you get to the split. And that's the kind of issue where I want to lead into a discussion of tactics. How do you deal with that? Because this is a situation where you can pick your map up and you can see where the split is coming. Do you lead? Do you follow? What's the tactic? If you look then at the 3rd round of the World Cup in 2019, there's a slightly different variation on this, where there are actually 4 controls, which you visit twice. That's 1 and 9, 3 and 10 are the same, 5 and 11 are the same, and 8 and 14 are the same. So in this case, someone's going obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, but then they come back to number 1 as number 9, and then they go straight to number 10, which was previously number 3, straight to number 11, which was number 5, and then there's actually a 2 control difference before you come back to number 14, which was number 8. So using those 4 controls twice again gives you multiple splits so that nobody is doing the same thing. And again, this is one where you're leading, going into that first split straight at the first control. So clearly from between 1 and 3 people are going to go straight, as you see down here, and 3 people are going to go through number 2. And then there's going to be another split between 3 and 5, where some people are going to go direct and then have to go to number 4 on their second rotation. So that's actually quite a bit different from having a pivot control. And again, it's probably something that has to come, given the nature of how you do it, it probably means you're going into that first split quite early on. Then, of course, you get to the great map choice. That previous one was the quarterfinal of the World Cup in 2019, round 3. This was the semi-final. Haven't been able to divide it out into separate maps, but you can see that, again, there are a variety of different possibilities. The first one here, actually, this has 3 separate splits of 2 controls, except in one of them, the first control, 2 splits go to the same first control, but then have different second controls, whereas the 3rd split has separate controls for both of them. It's the only time I've seen that, of having a common control on the split. And I guess one of the arguments is that if you see that when you look at it, you know that there's a good chance that if you choose one of the splits that goes to this control, you're going to have someone else running with you. Whereas if the 3 separate splits, you may not. This is then the World Cup Round 3 2019. Was a knockout. This was a knockout final. And here, again, there's the splits now. There's a common first control for everybody, common second control. Splits becoming is a single control split between 2 and 4. So there's 2 differences there in terms of number of controls that are actually in the split. And of course, this is something that you'll becoming very common in Europe, is roads blocked off to increase the complexity of the route choice.
Malcolm, just a very quick question, sorry to interrupt there. Just
Yep.
on the final course, just Daniel Gray's posted something in chat to a quick question in there. Just regard the final course, are there fewer forks and splits there because for the final, the IOF really wants it television friendly, wants people running in a pack or sort of?
That's a very good question. And knowing the IOF, I would imagine that may well be the case. Yes. Yeah. They're emphasizing TV coverage for sprint races and the knockout sprints. So that may well be the case. Yes. And I think might see that a little bit later on.
So apart from route choice, the only control there with the course truly splits is in 2 to 3 and 3 to 4.
Yeah. Well, the only split is 2 to 3. Yeah, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. Yeah. You've got a choice of 3s. That's all.
Yeah, Daniel Gray posted in the chat, I thought competitors aren't meant to know in the map course where the course split is.
No, you'll see that shortly. No, you don't. When you make your choice, you don't know where in the course it is going to occur. Well, there's an example. I'll show you an example later on as how it's actually marked when they actually make their choice. This is the European Champs semi-final this year, actually, which again has a split between 1 and 4 of the common controls, and there are three number 2s and 3 number 3s, and the 2s are actually they're actually quite diverse if you look at them. In fact, you've got a number 2 way back here on this one, and number 2 sort of intermediate on the next one, but then the third one it's way up around where number 3 is on the first choice. So those are that's a very different proposition to a certain extent to having a split where the 3 controls are very, very close together. This was what I used for our quarterfinal in Auckland after our nationals, which we use. It doesn't come out quite so well, but yeah, again, it's a bit similar to that last one in the fact that the splits were actually very widely different, and it was interesting to see who actually went for what. I mean, some of the people listening will have actually run that, but I mean, this one looked very attractive, except for the fact there's a big uncrossable fence between that one and that one. And the other one, this is interesting, is there's 2 things interesting about this. Was the final of the European Champs this year, and it didn't use any forking at all. Not only that, but despite that dictum in the original thing about using separate courses, it didn't actually use a separate part of the map, because this is the same part of the map as we were looking at in that previous example from the European Champs. So they were actually running very much over the same terrain into the same part of the map. But that was basically a straight race. Arguable that yes, there was not so much route choice to number 1, but from 1 to 2 there's significant route choice, and there's a few other legs as well. I mean, 7 to 8, you can probably argue that you've got a choice around here rather than having to run right the way around the wall, or you can go through the steps here and around the building to get to those steps. But it seemed to work in terms of a final. So what I thought I'd say a little bit about was how it works in practice, and this is where I think to answer your that one of those questions, and if I just turn the laser pointer off, this is how the map the map change works in practice. Again, this is available on the IOF site. So this is what the competitors faced with. All shielded from each other, as we're aware, so that you can't see what anyone else is actually choosing. They then get the map with the 3 variations on, shown like that, and the 3 variations are then in under those bundles 14.1, 14.1, 14.1. They choose which one they want and put the map they have chosen on upside down on their little start thing until the start beeps go down. I did notice on the IOF website when they reported on the map choice at the European Champs, it talked about how stressful some competitors found it, and I think that's probably a reasonably common experience as far as I can tell from having watched people doing it, trying to work out which one they actually want. I think it spins around to see them all running off, with the cameraman behind them, of course. These are 2 examples actually from they're actually on the IOF website. So, okay, so here you got ready to pick. After the countdown, you've got 20 seconds. So here's your chance to actually go. You can see, although it's marked with triangle 1, 2, and 3, that does not necessarily indicate where they come in the course. And in fact, 2 of these picks have got 2 controls before the common one. One has only got 1. There's your 20 seconds. What did people go for? Any offers? I lost everybody.
No, we're here.
You're still trying to work it out. It's probably not the best on the computer screen, I'm afraid. But
hey, Malcolm, I have a question. What happens if you don't pick one?
You get assigned one at random, is my understanding. The official dealing with you will give you one at random.
Right, that makes sense.
Which I think you probably find that most people will make their own pick in panic at the last second rather than leave it to someone else to give them one. Give me a moment. There's another one here as well. Then I've got a couple of my own. So here's another one. Again, after the countdown, you've got 20 seconds. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure how useful the control descriptions actually are. And these are IOF's artificial examples, I think. So I wouldn't worry too much about them. But yeah, 20 seconds doesn't last long when you're under pressure. So rather than that, I'll give you a couple of
I think my comment looking at those examples were that there were a lot of controls in the split, whereas the actual race examples you had put up
don't have that. I agree.
Much simpler.
Yeah, I agree, Anna. I agree. And I think, I mean, to say those were artificial examples taken off the IOF website. And I think they don't seem to be realistic compared to anything that we've actually seen in competition so far.
Yeah, those ones might be okay if you had a minute, but 20 seconds is not really very much. I couldn't even figure out where they go in 20 seconds. I can't see them that well. So
yeah, I'd agree with Anna. That was far more stressful than any I've actually had to do in a race. So
try these ones then. When next press my little arrow, this will come up with 1 and then it'll disappear after 20 seconds. Haven't put the control descriptions on, I'm afraid. Yeah, it's gone. So yeah, let's just have a little, yeah, there it is, come back. Let's just have a little look at what do you, I mean, the thing to me about, yeah, that to me is probably a more typical example where you've got to deal with, I agree, it probably looks a bit small on the screen for you, but you've got to deal with tracks through olive green areas or uncrossable walls and decide which way to go. As I say, 20 seconds doesn't appear very long when you're trying to do that. So I think it's, to me, the more practice you've got at that, the actual better. Did anyone make any choices there? That's a map that no one's actually run on.
A.
B.
A.
B.
I chose A, but it looks like B would be better. Maybe.
B, you've only got one little duck back around off the red line, really.
I chose A.
Yeah, go A.
I chose A because there looked to be less complexity in going from control to control.
For 1 to 2 from A, would people be going straight across and down or down and around?
Straight across.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, around the top.
You don't have to look at olive green or fences.
This is actually the top of the hill. Lizzie might recognise where it is.
Malcolm, if you're going to cover it later, then I'll dip out. But I was looking at some of those choices earlier where the athletes have to choose, or even when there's 3 separate forking options chosen. Does the setter have to painstakingly plan the optimum route and make sure that no one course is 60 metres longer or 100 metres longer than another, which could then affect qualification times?
Well, yeah. Remember, it's the qualification times on this don't actually matter. It's only the placings in the knockout rounds.
Okay.
So the time doesn't actually matter.
Okay.
I guess the answer is yes. You've got to try and optimally, you've got to make it as hard as you can for people to actually choose. And in fact, I did actually look at. I blew these up a bit for you actually. Option A there was actually 390 meters by what I regarded as the optimum route. Option B is 10 meters shorter. But as I say, in 1, you've got to, as someone pointed out, you've got to dip back out and around the olive green because it's on the inside of that uncrossable wall. And C is actually 10 meters shorter again, but you've got the complexity of getting through this little track network to get around. So it's actually, even allowing for that, it is actually shorter, but there's probably more thinking in it. And the other thing that, of course, comes into this is changes of direction. The more change of direction you have, the more you have to slow down as you go. Got another one. Are you ready for another 20 seconds? You can start it now. There you go, that's your 20 seconds. So this is, again, this is something no one's run on and we probably never will. It's actually a Masonic retirement village, which I don't think we'll be able to get access to, unfortunately, because that wonderful little complexity of buildings is absolutely marvelous. I mean, I sort of, again, looked at this, what first one, A, is 260 meters. You've got to decide how you're going to go around that building, however. And of course, if you go around to the left, you're changing direction. to come out to number 2, which is necessarily going to slow you down. So, this is the kind of thing, I guess, which has to come into actually making your actual choice. So that was 260 meters. B was 10 meters shorter. You've got to work out now your best route. Your best route to number 1's probably the hardest bit on here. Whether you're going to go around that way or whether you're going to try and weave your way through the buildings to maintain flow going through it. And again, 2, if you take what's probably looks like the direct route to 2, which is through here, of course, again, you're going in and out, and that's potentially loss of change of direction, equates to a certain extent to loss of speed. And 3, again, what's your best route to number 2, taking into account number 1 as well, with the fact that you've got direction changes in there all the time. Do you want to go around there, so you're flowing through number 2? Do you want to go through there, at which point you're actually changing direction as you come into number 2? And I think, when you get down to the kind of seconds that positions in these races come down to, these are, the considerations which in 20 seconds are frankly very difficult to actually make decisions on. So how do we train for it? Well, what I've sort of come to the conclusion is, if we want to treat this properly at international level, then every sprint training we have should have exercises which are tailored to a knockout sprint. Obviously, you can do map choice exercises. So there's one that's sort of drafted. Don't look too closely at it, because those of you currently under 23 camp might have to do that. You can, if you're doing it in training, what I'd say, and I think some people did this when we had that bit of training after that sprint relay at Lonely Mountain a couple of years ago, was make your choice and run it, but then sort of go back and try the other options as well, and just satisfy yourself that you actually make the right choice. If you didn't, what was wrong about your choice? If it wasn't fastest, what was it that slowed you down? I think an important aspect is sort of running all the options, so you get a feel for what's right and what's not right. Then, of course, even just route choice exercises, something like running, start to 1 or even 5 to 6 there. It's simulating, to a certain extent, it's simulating a map choice without having to think about the intermediate controls. So just for example, to me, you could consider that there are 3 routes from 5 to 6, and they more or less go through where I've put those 3 red controls. And therefore, in choosing your route, to a certain extent, you are actually simulating what might be a map choice. So you've either got, are you going to go around this end of this building and through there, and then down the steps and whatever to get to number 6? Are you going to go around this side of it, in which case you're going to go through there, and if you come in here, you're going to be weaving your way down these little tracks? Or if you want to go down those tracks, are you actually better coming around here, or which sort of takes you through what might be a map choice control that will be up there? So again, I think the important point in all of this is actually to analyze what you've done after you've actually done it. Then, of course, there's mass start pivot exercises. A lot of things like that. Obviously, it's head-to-head racing. You've got to get used to head-to-head racing. And as I said, how do you control your speed? If you're doing a pivot exercise with 6 of you setting off at once, and you're treating it actually as a race, this is where what I alluded to, we'll come to in a minute, about tactics comes in. How, you know, how are you going to do it? How do you manage your speed in actually doing that? And again, afterwards, of course, did you make the correct choices under pressure? Because in a knockout sprint, you know, you're under pressure in an ordinary sprint anyway, but I think it's going to be much more intense in a knockout environment. And, you know, actually running knockout sprints or short, small knockout sprints at training camps comes into it as well. But I really do think that, you know, we should be, if we want to do well in these things, we should be including all of these things whenever we do sprint training. And this is where, as I said at the beginning, I sort of more throw it open for discussion, because, I mean, in an ordinary individual sprint, you know, you're just running your own race basically as cleanly as you can, as fast as you can, and you know, you may catch people up, people may catch you up, but essentially you're an individual running your own race. Once you get into the knockout rounds of this, then, you know, as I say, you've got different things you need to think about. Simplest, I mean, these were just 3 things that I put as sort of put down as, if you like, talking points, these discussion points. I mean, do you actually try and win your quarterfinals and semi-finals, or do you aim just to actually get through without actually expending too much energy? Or if you do that, are you running the risk of actually missing out? And conserving your energy for 4 separate races in a day is going to be one of the key things in this.
Malcolm, can I just ask a question? The qualifying race, the very first qualifying race, appears to be on normal sprint basis. So you might have 3 different courses, but you start at 60 or 90-second intervals.
Yeah.
But from then on, all the elimination races are mass start.
Yes, that's right.
So the qualification's not mass start, no.
Qualification's not mass start. Qualification's a normal sprint, except for the fact that it's shorter.
Yeah. So it sounds like the elimination stage is a lot like we do in Ironman Survivor format, I think, where, again, it gets chopped from 24 to 18 to 12, and the athletes have to work out how hard they want to go. And especially if you know you're going to come anywhere from sort of 6th to 9th or so in a larger race of 12 or 18 people, do you want to, how much do you bust a gut to make it to the next round?
Yeah. Now, so as we said, you don't know where, well, if you've got a split like with a common control, when you pick your map up, you can see where it does come. And we've seen examples there of it being starting at the first control and starting later on. I mean, do you actually try and lead into a split, or do you actually follow into the split and read ahead, get a feel for what's coming later on?
Malcolm, could I just jump in there?
Yeah, sure. Anyone?
Sorry, no, and remember where you are and keep going. But Ralph Street, who's we all know is pretty damn good at sprints. He's only got about 5 minutes, and then he's got to head off. So I'm just wondering whether we could, since he had that ripper run in the World Cup in 2019 in Switzerland, where he he used some tactics at the end of his race and looked ahead and took that sort of route choice.
That's my 3rd point there. Yeah,
and I'm wondering, with Ralph can jump in and tell us, was he looking ahead to see whether he could take a quicker, shorter route choice because he won that semi? And Ralph.
Hello, Tash. Good morning, everyone, or good evening. I'm out here in the forest training for Tia Mila, so maybe not super relevant. But that, once I was in the group at the end of that semi-final, and I could definitely see that there was a route choice near the end, and I was very sure that my route choice was best, basically. So I took that one.
So you knew in advance you were going to just go for it?
I knew that going left was best. And then once I saw the other guys took the other choice, then it was just to run as absolutely hard as I possibly could.
Nice one. And Ralphie, what about when you've got runner's choice? You know, those maps, because I know you've mentioned before that you look at 2 and pick the best, and then you look at the third one or something. Is that what you do?
Yeah, I compare A against B, and then I compare whichever one is best against C.
Okay.
And to try and look at which ones are best, there'll often be like a kind of key building or key forking somewhere that you might have to, all the routes need to go round the left-hand side of it, for example. And then you pick whichever one you think is shortest to get to that key point.
Okay. Anyone got any questions for Ralph? Anything else? How far ahead do you look in your course when you pick it up, Ralph, when you're starting like this mass starting? Can you see as soon as you pick up your map what Malcolm's been talking about with, you know, the different versions of splits, or is it you don't know? Like, can you see the pivots and go, right, we're running?
Know whether it's runner's choice based on whether you have to go through it. And then the only option that they've got left would be some kind of butterfly, or it's unforked. And I think you'd be able to work that out pretty quickly, or at least you work it out when the forking happens, you'd be aware of it. But I don't think I'm looking at the whole course on the way to the start to see where it is. I don't think I'm doing that.
Okay, it's just unfolding as you're running. And what's your actual physical sort of, I guess, tactic? Do you, as Malcolm was talking about with the qualification, you know, with the races all during the day, do you take them all hard, or have you got some tactic?
I think unless you're the best women in the world, you have to go full out on that qualification, because there are so many people who are good enough to qualify. It might be a little bit easier at World Champs actually, with less people. So maybe then there's a possibility to go a little bit slower. And then when you're in the heats, I think if you don't think you can sprint, as in run a last 400 meters very quickly, I think you should push the pace from the start. But I think it's just about going at the speed of the group, basically. If the group wants to go a little bit slower, then you can do that, because you don't have anyone who goes, you can't go forward on time, you just go forward on placings. So in that respect, it doesn't matter if your heat goes slower, as long as you're in the top 3 or top 2.
Yeah. And what about sitting sort of second or third or something and actually looking forward on your map, and then and let someone else lead?
If you're going to follow people, you've got to make sure that they're good. And that just comes down to being a bit of a nerd and like learning who the other people are in the start field. I know that there's a lot of people who like running at the front, because then they feel like it's more of a normal sprint race. They get to decide the speed, they get to pick their routes. But personally, I feel very comfortable running in the group and kind of relaxing, and you just look ahead and at other people and you can see where all the turnings are, basically.
Yep. Nice. Alrighty. Well, that's good. Thanks, Ralph.
Yeah, thank you,
You're
Ralph.
very welcome. Does anyone have any questions? I got maybe 3 more minutes before I need to get going.
Come on.
Spin
Somebody.
the forest. Look at this forest, everyone. Oh my God.
Don't tease us, Ralph.
It's probably -2, so I don't think you'd be particularly happy, Tash.
No. Come on, somebody have a question for Ralph.
One of the few things, I think there's a lot of effort being put in about the kind of runner's choice and the kind of knockout element, but you've first got to qualify, and that is not particularly easy, actually.
How long typically between races? You might have 4 in a day, so how long between races?
It's not long, but you do the heat and then the quarterfinal in the morning, and then the semi and the final are in the afternoon. And what can be quite important is you get more of a rest if you get in the first semi-final, and to get in the first semi-final you need to be in the first quarterfinal. So that can maybe influence, because you get to pick which heats you run in after the qualification. So maybe that can influence like which heat, but in terms of answer, I think you get maybe an hour maximum, maybe between half an hour and an hour.
And
what
do you do in that time? Do you do any kind of recovery or stretching in that time, because you're going flat out in all 4 races?
I try and keep jogging between. If it's a short enough time, I'll just keep warming up basically between them. And then in between the morning and the afternoon, then it's as much recovery as possible. Lie down, eat, lie down, and just wait basically.
Alrighty, I think that might be it. What training are you doing, Ralph? Forest training.
We're gonna run O intervals. I think 3 by 3K.
Nice
So
one.
that'll be fun.
Good. All right, good to see you, Ralph. Thanks so much for jumping in.
Well, have fun, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for letting me do that, Malcolm. Right, back
Oh,
to you.
I'd essentially got to the end anyway, so that was the point. I was hoping for input from other people. So I don't know if anyone else has got any comments.
Lizzie, you've run a few.
No, that's a myth. I've actually only run that one that you saw me in the video, plus a couple in New Zealand. No, I think Ralph covered off most of the major points. I'd agree with. I still haven't found quite where I best sit or where I most comfortably sit. But certainly from forest relays and that sort of thing, I find it easier to tuck into the group because generally you can hold the pace quite comfortably, but it gives you that extra time to read your map and plan ahead for the important bit, which is the final couple of controls, effectively. And then a hell of a lot of physical training to make sure that you've got the kick that will actually get you into that top 2 or 3 in the last couple of controls. But yeah, and like Malcolm said, there's an awful lot that you can do to prepare for knockout sprints, theoretically. In terms of, just fast route choice selection and that sort of thing. But as Ralph very correctly pointed out, and that's probably the bit that we're going to struggle with training for down here, is that you have to get into the quarterfinals and the semis before you start bringing in the tactics with the route choices and whatever else. So while it might be easy to qualify here, once you get over to Europe or the bigger competitions, that qualification race, you have to go all out.
You've got to remember, in a individual sprint heats, it's still going to be 15 qualifying for the individual sprint. In knockout, it's only 12. So there's a smaller allowance for mistakes, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so you're treating it basically like an individual sprint first up.
Yeah, and I think one further point to remember is these sprints are either 6 to 8 minutes or 8 to 10 minutes. So it is different from your training for an individual sprint. And you'll find that you can hold a higher pace for 10 minutes than for 15 minutes. So it is specific training as well.
Actually, that's a really good point, Lizzie. Yeah, that they are.
I
shorter.
think Brianna just asked a question, and I was going to say that's probably the one thing we didn't touch on that much was physically how to prepare. Brianna just asked if there's anything special you could do to prepare for the physical aspect of 4 races in one day. Any thoughts, Malcolm, or anyone else, I guess?
Well, I think experiencing it is probably the best. I mean, Joseph Lynch might like to comment on this, because a couple of weeks ago at Labour Weekend, he was instrumental in getting Canterbury University Club to put on, how many was it, Joe? 15 800-metre sprints in sprint races in the course of a day. And they moved all around Christchurch, one after the other. And yeah, I mean, that repeated short race, I mean, I guess they were sort of 4 or 5 minutes rather than 6 8 minutes, is something that gets your body used to the recovery anyway. So yeah, I think it's I mean, I've been sort of planning things for the camp in December, which unfortunately I suspect half the people, vast majority of people, they won't be able to come to. But yeah, the middle weekend of that is dedicated to sprint training, and yeah, a lot of it's going to be high intensity, one after the other, after the other, after the other, to try and simulate this kind of thing, as well, of course, as covering things like individual sprints and knockout and sprint relays. But I think, yeah, practice is the best preparation, I think, in terms of the physical aspect.
Yeah, I think from a from my point of view, it is nearly a gap in the market type of thing, in that I don't think anyone is physically preparing specifically for knockout sprint. They're just running off what they prepared for the rest. So it's interesting in that if someone, it could be a way in if someone's very interested in that area from Australia to New Zealand to specifically prepare for the race, because it is not like anything else. It's as you can see in the results, it's often the older sprinters that are probably higher up in the results. There's a few young ones that have popped up in and around the results this year, but I think having that combination of speed and endurance, because you've got to do 4 races, and if you look at particularly the men, or men and women, they both run. Once you put in your warm up and warm down, which is important if you want to run fast, you do need to warm up and warm down. You are going to do 25 up to 30 Ks. I can't remember what Yannick did that time when he did the full thing. He did I remember him posting that he'd done quite a bit of running. So it is a lot. So I think it's not just, if you wanted to be really good at knockout, it's not just about doing the knockout training. That is really important to sort of simulate it. And I would do, like, let's say we're going to World Champs, I would do probably now until World Champs, you probably want to try and get in 5 to 10 simulation type days where either you do a knockout or you do something similar. But outside of that, you still need to, if your focus is purely on the knockout, I think time in terms of training aerobically, so it's more like training for a long distance, and then those really fast speed sessions, like Lizzie said, it is higher intensity, it's speed, and getting the capacity to be able to kick, either whether that's partway through the race or at the end of the race, is really important. So I would suggest, if people are looking at the sort of knockout type stuff, you'd be wanting to do some of those repetition sessions where you run really fast, and then you have a significant amount of rest, maybe 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 even, where you're really working on that speed, and then couple that with distance, mileage on other days. I think is probably, if you were specifically training for knockout, I think they'd be the key things that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. Like Ralph said, and Malcolm, if you're sitting behind someone coming towards the finish and they're taking the top 2 in your heat, if you can kick over that last 50 meters to get around somebody.
It's nearly like a team sport. knockout. If you would draw the closest comparison, it's like a football or a soccer where you've got to run the whole time, but you've got to be able to kick and do short bursts.
Yeah.
If you think of it in even just the race, but then also the whole day. So even a bit of team sport on the side is probably not going to hurt, I reckon. And that gives you good agility as well. Lizzie plays a bit of soccer. She's probably well equipped.
Just don't get injured.
Yeah, be careful with that. I didn't tell anyone to play soccer.
I've never injured myself playing soccer.
No.
Yeah, soccer's pretty, as long as you don't do anything risky, you're probably all right. Footy's maybe a bit rougher.
It's part of the speed training is how to not get tackled.
True. Good for agility.
No, look, I'd fully agree with that. And yeah, we were trying to put a figure on it. I think in a knockout day, you're going to end up doing a bit over 20 Ks in terms, and half of that is at high intensity. And yeah, like Ralph said, those short gaps between the races, it feels weird, but it is almost best to just keep jogging the entire time between them, because otherwise you find you warm down, you sit down for 10 minutes, then you're warming up again.
Anyone else got any comments? I guess we're all learning. So
I guess from an organiser's perspective, so for the ones after Easter at the Gold Coast, yeah, so that'll be for the first one that we do as a Knoll. I guess does anybody who's done a few have any specific comments about things that either should be in or out, or yeah, I guess anything.
I was involved with I set 2 of the one at the Melbourne Sprint Weekend that wasn't Knoll, but after a lot of the Knoll competitors ran. I think having a variety of splitting techniques, but it's similar to sort of what he covered at the start of his presentation in terms of doing that. But I think having a variety is good. And even if I think particularly important for us at Melbourne Sprint Weekend was where we were using the same map, was then trying to change the map a little bit between the 2 races if you were using it for multiple. So we had some temporary barriers that we put up while people were sort of in the arena quarantined after their first try at it. So it's sort of same area, but it changed it a lot. And I think that really keeps, especially in the final where if they're the second 2 races that are on the same map, which there was at Melbourne Sprint Weekend, the final is usually a little less splitting. I think it was the same, but I just tried to create good route choice. But given the competitors are already familiar with the map, we really needed the new temporary fencing up to give them that challenge in the last one instead of it just being a running race. That would probably be my thing. Are you using more than one map? Are you using different area for every race?
Yeah, so I think the current plan is that we're going to have I think we're going to go off the qualification. So on the Saturday, we're doing the qualification for the straight up world ranking event sprint. And then we're going to use that qualifier as the seeding heat, as the seeding race for the knockout, and then do the 3 races on the Sunday, just because we're going to end up, we've got the night sprint Friday night and 2 races and 3 races. So we're pretty heavy on it the weekend after Easter. So then I think it's going to be the first 2 races on the Sunday will be on the same map and then a different map for the final. Don't absolutely quote me on that because things have changed a lot. But I think that's where we're at. So yeah, the tip about doing something to change up that map between races could be a good one.
Yeah, either that or like different splitting methods is also sort of throw something else in the mix. Like I think anytime you have a map choice, it's going to really sort of shake the competitors a little bit. So as we sort of found when we were doing it then. So I think if that's one of the options that you utilize, then that's nearly enough in itself, depending on how, especially if you can use maybe a little bit of overlap, but slightly different areas or a new part of the map that you haven't seen before for at least part of the course or something like that would be,
From an organizer perspective, how hard is it to program everything in the computer as they progress from round to round? because you've only got an hour between races in some instances. How does that all? How hard is that for the person on the computer?
That's a very good question.
Wasn't my job. I was just the creative brains behind it, but I think Jim may have done most of that.
Comes under NMP as far as I'm concerned.
I think one of the things with that is if we can have it as a set position. So if you come a certain position in one race, then you're automatically put into a certain position in the next race. So then it's a matter of being, basically you have placeholders in there, and that the person who's on the computer can just
sort of good to go.
Get going on it, straight away.
I believe that may have been how we did it at Melbourne Sprint Weekend. I can't remember exactly, but I think there was we didn't do the sort of pick which heat you want to go into, because I think that just adds a lot of complexity. And yeah, I think we had pre-assigned. You would sort of allocated in depending on where you came.
Yeah,
Ralph did allude to that.
Yeah.
Didn't he? Did Ralph say, I didn't quite hear, but I think Ralph said that that's, you pick your spot. So it might not have just been the once that Lizzie was there. It might be.
I've only seen it once in Czech, but I haven't been at the other one, so I don't actually know. But I haven't seen it from the live coverage side of things.
But you can also see from that the start draw set up for the qualification round that if you get the win in a certain heat, you'll go into a certain qualification.
That's what Ralph said. That, I mean, and it was on that slide I put up that if you get into qualification heat, quarterfinal heat 1, you can, if you know from your place in that what semi-final you're going to go into, because there is that table laid out of the way to do it. And I think that's probably the way to set it up. And that's the way we set it up in 2020. So we knew who finished in which quarterfinal, where they were going to go in the semi-final, and so on. But give yourself a bit of extra time by putting a public race on at an appropriate point, so you get a breather.
Yeah.
My next question, Malcolm, and for anyone who's done it before, is if it's part of a public carnival, not just an elite knockout, if you don't make it through to the elimination, are you done, or do you get a repechage race to run at some stage, so you get to feel that atmosphere that everyone does?
The two we've done here in January, we had it was part of a public carnival, so we ran the qualification. Then there was a public race, and then we ran the quarterfinals. Then we sort of moved a little bit to run the semi-finals. But anyone who didn't qualify for the quarterfinal or the semi-final were then able to run in a second public race, which went on between the semi-final and the final, which gave a gap for the people in the knockout rounds. But it gave another race for people who didn't qualify. In April this year, when we ran one, we were after daylight saving, so we didn't have so much time. So we didn't actually run a qualification. We just put people into quarterfinals on, I can't remember whether they did it on world ranking or what. And we did actually, because I didn't want people to just have one knockout round and get knocked out and then not have anything else. We actually did have not repechages, but we had B semi-finals and C semi-finals, and then we had, I can't remember how many finals we had. We might have had an A, B, C, D, E, and F final. So everybody got 3 races.
Good. Otherwise, if you're forking out carnival type entries, these people will go, I'm not going to pay if I'm going to get knocked out in 7 minutes or 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think generally the qualification race is a bit longer. So if for the winners, it's maybe 12 minutes. So if you're at the back of the field, you're probably going to get your normal sprints worth out of it. And then Melbourne Sprint Weekend, we ran a second race because we were aligning with a public race, and they have 6 races. So I think anyone there was very limited people that got knocked out in the qual, and then more people started getting knocked out in the quarterfinal. And then they still ran, and I believe it was the same thing as what Malcolm explained. I think we ran the semi-final first, and then the public went out, and then the final was sort of after all the public came back.
Yeah.
That was tricky in our temporary fences because we were trying to put them up while the public were out. So we had tapes and we had people at each one holding it down for when people went past, but then mostly up when the elites ran. I think that was a bit tricky, but that was just poor planning.
I mean, it's a good point. I think locally, yes, you've got to do something to give people more than just a short burst and then, sorry, your day's over now. Yeah.
I think it depends what type of, like, how big a field you're doing it for. Like, if you're doing it for, say, for example, in Australia, a knoll or alongside a knoll, then having a second race on. If you're doing it for a less big field and it's just, say, more of a training type thing and maybe less of a serious event, then there's other formats that you can set up where you get points each round and you get relegated and up and down and that sort of thing that keeps the whole field the whole way through. We did a version of that at I think Pat Jaffe set it for us in Victoria when we did it as a training session. So there was some sort of relegation and up and down, and you got a certain amount of points depending on where you came in each race, and therefore it still sort of kept everyone in it. So that works if you've got like not enough people to do a full knockout, I guess.
Because I think I saw somewhere that future Australian champs or Oceania champs are going to have a knockout sprint. So I don't know whether that's going to apply only to the elites or whether that's going to apply across all age classes.
I can sort of update you on that. That's Oceania, the Oceania champs. Well, it's not final yet, but it's most unlikely that it will go out as the Oceania champs simply because borders aren't going to be open, and it's at this stage it's still uncertain even whether Aucklanders are going to be able to travel south. But as of last week, Nelson Orienteering Club, who were going to hold a sprint relay the day before the knockout, have declared that they're not going to run that. So I've sort of reluctantly made the decision that we won't run the knockout in January either, but we will hold it. Our national champs are in Nelson at Easter, so we'll hold it immediately after the national champs in Blenheim, which is, I won't say just down the road, but not very far away. So yes, there was going to be one before Oceania, but in this COVID circumstances, that's fallen by the way. And I don't know have you been involved in the emails that have been going around today, Tash? On
a little bit, yeah.
And
yeah, I got them too.
Were you doing a knockout, sorry, Malcolm, for non-elite competitors as well?
No, we weren't. No, we were going to put on a public race after the qualification for everybody else, and arguably one in the afternoon as well.
I imagine, Ian, at this stage that the Oceania, the main reason we want it as an Oceania event is so that there's whoever is the regional champion can get the free spot at WOC. So that's the main motivation, I guess, and it's good practice. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to be featuring at Australian champs. It would only be because it's already a packed schedule. It'll be featuring as an Oceania champs for that main reason. And I think it'll probably stay elites, but hopefully, or who knows down the track what it'll end up doing. But I imagine we'll still want to feature it in sort of state level events and knolls and that sort of stuff because we need to practice it.
Yeah, and this sort of feeds in my next question, and the HP group may not have discussed it yet, but when a knoll sprint weekend is held, whether it's a sprint year or not a sprint year, is the assumption going to be that a knockout sprint will be part of a knoll sprint weekend so that all the athletes can get practice at it?
I guess that would be discussed. My opinion would be discussed on a yearly basis. But for the sprint year, it would be a very good idea for there to be at least one sprint knockout that's included. So, for example, next year there's just the one in Queensland, but there will also be a sprint knockout offered on the Monday of Melbourne Sprint Weekend. So there's still opportunity to get practice at it. So I don't think it's compulsive. I don't think we'll make it. I don't know. That's me at the moment, just thinking. We haven't really thought about that much, but I think as much as we can get people doing them will be good, especially in a sprint year.
I guess the other thing as well is that you're trying to fit sprint relays into that schedule as well, and realistically we have a better chance of getting a somewhat reasonable result in a sprint relay internationally than we do potentially in the knockout. So
yeah, and I guess also with Knowles, the Knoll races are about, for us, getting numbers and being, sort of involving states and teams. So the sprint relays, really important for that. But like Brodie said, in a sprint year, we'd want at least one knockout sprint.
I just saw that Evelyn put in the chat that if anyone's looking for
too.
some, more knockout training, that they do one in Adelaide at the sprint camp. I've done it a couple of times there, and it's really fun. So I think knockouts are a heap of fun, even for me that I'm not aiming for it on a WOC level. It's just such a fun competition to do. So and you need to have people competing in it. So otherwise it's less fun. So it's good to get around them when they're on, I think.
And Evelyn and South Australia do put on good sprint training weekends. So if that suits everyone's timing, I'd, and you're looking at doing sprints next year, I'd definitely.
And you're allowed to go.
Yeah.
And we're allowed to go. Yeah.
No, that's just an unsaid disclaimer now, Anna.
Yeah. So we're really
on the
not
23rd,
sure.
they'll ease restrictions, so you should be able to come over.
Yeah, and so back to New Zealand and Malcolm and Oceania, and the decision will be in the next week or so. Everyone will hear, and things will be a bit shuffled. So I guess everyone will find out.
The suggestion at the moment, I mean, because we still have this issue of qualification for personal places for WOC next year, which would have been the knockout sprint in January and the Oceania Champs sprint. If they're not Oceania Champs, then of course that doesn't apply. And it looks as if the only sensible option is to try and get IOF to agree to use a knockout sprint and a sprint at Melbourne Sprint Weekend to give personal places at WOC to the people who win them. So they'd be, I guess you'd call them pseudo Oceania Championships. It's unfortunate, it's unfortunate it means we have to travel across the Tasman rather than you, but
we were definitely looking forward to coming though, Malcolm.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
So what's the event that you have the weekend after Easter?
Well, what, in New Zealand, you mean?
Yeah, because just in that email trail, it was like, that weekend doesn't work for you guys.
We will have we've got Easter, we'll have this national sprint on Friday, middle distance, I don't know whether it's Saturday or Sunday, long distance, the other one, Saturday, Sunday, relay on Monday. Then we're now going to put on the knockout sprint that should have been in January, either on the Tuesday or the Wednesday. But then there are various other events the following weekend, which make it very difficult for us to consider that weekend that you're putting on in Queensland for that. I mean, we might have to revisit it if we can't get to Australia by Melbourne Sprint Weekend. We might have to revisit it. But
because our issue with certainly the Melbourne Sprint Weekend is if the knockout sprint is on the Monday, it's only a holiday for a small number of states, and then it's
and then it have to relook at the schedule there.
Yeah, and so at the moment, I don't think it's even a null. So.
Maybe for everyone else that's listening to us, we're just sort of talking about Oceania and what's happening to those races, because the individual sprint and the knockout that was to be held at the Oceania Champs, give WOC places. so to the winners. So we've looked at the calendar and we've got, you know, the A option, which was originally, you know, the Oceania New Zealand, and then we've got a B option, a C option, and a D option, all according to COVID stuff. So that's what we're talking about, and it's still to be decided. It may well be, yeah, it may well be Melbourne Spring Weekend.
I guess on Anna's question, it'll probably we'll wait for complete confirmation of New Zealand, and then we will come up with a suitable plan and consult the states a little bit more in terms of, and New Zealand in terms of what is what can be. It's never going to be ideal. I guess people have to take off work to go to Oceania, so they might have to consider taking off work or university or whatever. I guess it's university as well. So it's something that we haven't fleshed out. We're all hoping that Oceania would go ahead. So once it's definitely called off, then we'll get our thinking caps on straight away and come up with a plan.
And it's important that we can get, you know, runners from both sides. New Zealand and Australia, they're, you know, a fair.
I mean, we'd certainly be keen to get if there was a decent Kiwi contingent over to our sprint weekend. I mean, we've got a sprint relay world ranking event knockout over the weekend, so it's and a travel day on Monday because that is a public holiday.
Yeah, and potentially a big social event on the
and just fly into the Gold Coast, super easy.
Anyway, we have to get the New Zealanders, as it was meant to be your race, you guys. So hopefully some miracle happens.
I wouldn't count on it.
No. Anyway.
It's ironic that I'm actually going down to Blenheim this coming week to actually check out the knockout sprint on the ground, be it January or April. I'm assuming things won't change between the two.
Yeah.
I've got a question about the map choice. I'd be keen to know if anyone's thought about just sort of disregarding the whole map choice and saying, I'm going to choose A no matter what, and then take the stress out of it and spend that 20 seconds planning your route choice perfectly. I know, especially if the choices are pretty equal anyway. Like, I'm not too sure. I haven't analyzed the route choices I've seen that much, but I don't know, I thought that could be a risky move.
Yeah, there seems to be one that's always, there's always one that seems to be bad, is what I've heard people say, that they've done that with two options. So they've looked at two, picked the better one, and then spent the rest of the time choosing, so that they take out the bad option, or they've got least chance. Well, no, that would mean that they can get rid of the worst option, because if it's not the one that they looked at, that's okay, and then they might get the best one. Or if it's in those two, then they get rid of it, and then they could spend the rest looking at it. I think I usually look at two myself, just because my brain doesn't work quick enough to look at three. So I think that's probably the approach I use. But I think it can be risky if you only look at if you only look at one, because I don't know, when I set the map choice, there was definitely one. There was if I look, the way I analysed it, they weren't even. There was the best one, the middle one, and the worst one. So I'm not sure if it turned out like that, but that's how I set it, because I thought that would be a good challenge, to pick it right.
Right, but even two, then, like you say, that's interesting. That could be it's a viable tactic.
Yeah, because I think at least you either get the second best or the best. If that's what they do, and if they're all the best, then you still spend a little bit of extra time looking at it. Yeah, I think I've heard Aston talk about that before. I don't know, Aston, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's what he's done.
I probably stole it from Aston. I pretended it's my technique.
Well, that's what he told me, so I've done a little bit as well.
Are you there, Aston? I don't know.
No, he's gone.
He's gone. Well, I've only done two, and that was Brodie's one, and then Malcolm's one in New Zealand. And the stress is real. My goodness, trying to and you go in and you think, right, I'm going to look at 2 and pick one and then look at the third. And, you know, my eyes are just going, you know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And it is something that we all really need to practice. And the more of these little, you know, like everyone's camp, and, you know, if we can get our guys over to any of your training and Melbourne Sprint Weekend, you know, hopefully we'll get lots of practice in the next few months.
Well, you can get across. There's an opportunity in February. Auckland have got Waitangi Waitangi Weekend Sprint Series, which is 4th. I think Waitangi Day is the 6th of February. I mean, I've got, so it's 4th before my. Sorry, I think I've been given up. I've told them to be too loud. I've been asked to use a.
I think that might line up with, that might clash with Evelyn's training camp, is first weekend in February, which is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, was the Northern Champs here, which was cancelled at Labour Weekend, is now going to take place the weekend afterwards in Rotorua. So there's 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, over the first weekend in February, followed by the following weekend has a middle distance sprint and a long distance on it as well, not too far from Auckland. And it's probably an ideal opportunity for throwing in a couple of days of training in between as well. But then, you know, that's the next thing up really following January, I guess.
All right, we'll have to make sure we just communicate and share any of these sort of training weekends or sprint weekends we've got on. It's not too far. Now we've been starved of travel. You know, we could do with a little zip over for some races. There you go. Oh, thanks so much, Malcolm. That was actually really good. Really good. We should do another one of these.
I think I saw back a little bit that Ian was saying it might be useful to do one from the point of view of the sprint setter, and I think that may be one that we look at in the future, doing even if it's not specific to knockout, but sprint course setting, which would be useful for organisers, but also useful for athletes to turn up to and have a listen on how course setters think. And we could touch on knockout in that as well. So I think that could be a good one, Tash, we could do at some point. We'll see. We had planned a few Oceania preparation ones, so maybe that will come up sooner than, maybe we'll have a few gaps in the calendar. And on that note, I think the next one will probably be we're aiming to do on the 28th of November. And at this stage, I think Tash will be the one with Paula. We just have to double check with her. So on sort of injury management and prevention.
Yep, we did.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think.
Thanks so much, though, Malcolm. That was very good, and like a really good discussion. We've talked for about 40 minutes afterwards. So yeah, obviously everyone's very interested in lots of questions. So yeah, good work.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for turning up too. That was really good.
Yeah, no, I think it's great when everyone turns up and listens in.
Yeah, it's good. It's good when people ask questions and things. All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've got dinner, but thank you. Thanks, so much, Malcolm. That was really good.